ultimately, does this mean that the EU tariff hammer is going to fall on Chinese EV exports, and how severe could those tariffs be?
In an unexpected twist, the European Union has made a bold move that could reshape the global electric vehicle (EV) market, potentially devastating the United States auto industry. The EU has recently opened its doors to Chinese electric vehicles, a decision that could give China a strategic advantage in one of the most lucrative markets in the world. Could this move tilt the balance of power in favor of China? The EU's game-changing decision. The European Union has just made a decision that could send shockwaves through the automotive industry. After a recent visit by the European Commission's head of trade to China, it was confirmed that the EU is opening its market to Chinese electric vehicles in a way that could give China a major foothold in Europe's highly competitive automotive sector. This shift comes at a time when the US has been pushing forward with protectionist tariffs aimed at defending American jobs and industries. But by rolling out the red carpet for Chinese EVs, the EU is doing the opposite, embracing foreign competition in a bid to secure a cleaner, greener future for its citizens. Why is this decision so significant? For years, China has been aggressively investing in the electric vehicle sector, using government subsidies, advanced battery technologies, and a thriving manufacturing ecosystem to produce EVs that are not only affordable, but also high in quality and innovation. While China has made strides in dominating its domestic market, the EU's embrace of these vehicles opens the door for Chinese automakers to expand into Europe, a crucial market for EVs, where strict emissions regulations and incentives are pushing for greater adoption of electric vehicles. But why now? The timing of the EU's decision is remarkable, as it comes when the US, under President Trump's administration, has implemented steep tariffs on foreign auto imports. These tariffs are designed to protect American manufacturers from overseas competition, but they also raise the cost of importing foreign vehicles, including those from China. Instead of allowing these tariffs to stifle global competition, the EU has chosen a different path, one that could dramatically alter the dynamics of the global automotive industry. Will this bold move by the EU allow China to dominate the global electric vehicle market, or could it backfire on both China and Europe? Let's dive into how this could affect the auto industry, China's rapid EV expansion, and why it matters. Over the past decade, China has emerged as a powerhouse in the electric vehicle market, with government-backed subsidies, cutting-edge battery technology, and an expansive manufacturing base. Chinese automakers such as BYD, NIO, and XPeng have scaled their production at an unprecedented rate. Their vehicles are not only affordable, but also increasingly competitive in terms of quality and technology, making them viable options for consumers globally. The success of Chinese EVs has been bolstered by China's dominance in the global supply chain for crucial EV components, particularly lithium-ion batteries. These batteries are the backbone of any electric vehicle, and China has invested heavily in both the production and refinement of the raw materials required for these batteries, such as lithium, cobalt, and nickel. In fact, China's influence in the global battery supply chain has only grown in recent years, putting them in a position to dictate the pricing and availability of these critical resources. But it's not just about affordable prices. Chinese automakers have invested heavily in research and development, R&D, pushing forward innovations in battery efficiency, autonomous driving, and even vehicle-to-grid technology, which allows EVs to contribute power back to the grid. This kind of innovation gives Chinese vehicles a technological edge that many European and American automakers have struggled to match, particularly in terms of cost effectiveness. The low production costs of Chinese EVs, along with their advancements in technology, have made them increasingly attractive to consumers in markets around the world. For the EU, opening up to Chinese electric vehicles is a way to meet their ambitious green goals and fulfill the growing demand for affordable, high-performance EVs. By allowing Chinese manufacturers to enter the market without excessive trade barriers, the EU hopes to accelerate the transition to electric mobility, offering European consumers a wider range of affordable electric options. However, this move is not without its risks. Could the influx of Chinese EVs into the European market cause disruption to European automakers? Or will it help accelerate the continent's green transition? The EU's economic gamble with China. Europe's decision to open its doors to Chinese electric vehicles is a gamble. While Chinese automakers bring affordable EVs to the table, they also bring with them a host of potential economic and political challenges. One of the main issues at play is the competition between Chinese EVs and European automakers, who have struggled to catch up to the rapid growth of the electric vehicle market. While automakers like Volkswagen, BMW and Mercedes-Benz have made strides in the EV market, they face higher production costs, complex supply chains, and regulatory hurdles. These challenges have made it difficult for European manufacturers to produce affordable EVs at the scale required to meet growing demand. By contrast, Chinese automakers benefit from lower production costs, allowing them to offer EVs at a significantly lower price point while maintaining quality and technology. This creates a challenging situation for European automakers. As China's presence grows in the European market, European companies will need to compete not just on quality, but on price as well. The influx of Chinese EVs could push European automakers to either lower their prices, which may cut into their profit margins, or innovate more aggressively, which would require significant investments in R&D. At the same time, the EU's decision to embrace Chinese EVs comes at a time when the US is facing an economic standoff with China.
The world's leading superpowers are locking horns.
Game on here. A trade war between the United States and China is here.
Driven by President Trump's protectionist tariffs, the US has raised trade barriers on Chinese imports in an effort to protect American jobs and industries, including the auto sector. However, by turning to China for electric vehicles, the EU is signaling a willingness to engage with China and embrace its growing dominance in the EV sector. This move could not only shift the balance of power in the auto industry, but it could also have long-term geopolitical consequences. Is the EU's embrace of Chinese EVs a smart move for the future of transportation? Or could it backfire by strengthening China's economic and geopolitical influence? The US auto industry and the price of protectionism. While the EU opens its doors to Chinese EVs, the US has opted for a more protectionist approach, imposing tariffs on foreign cars, including those from China. These tariffs were introduced with the intention of protecting American automakers from foreign competition, particularly in the EV market. However, the long-term impact of these tariffs may not be as beneficial as President Trump and his administration might hope. The tariffs have made it more expensive for American consumers to purchase foreign-made vehicles, and this includes electric vehicles from China. While the goal was to protect American jobs and industries, the reality is that these trade barriers have created higher production costs for American manufacturers, particularly in the auto sector. As a result, American automakers have found it increasingly difficult to compete on a global scale, especially as foreign manufacturers like China's BYD and NIO continue to innovate and drive down production costs. By focusing on protectionism, the US risks isolating itself from the global EV market. While it may shield domestic companies in the short term, these tariffs could ultimately make it more difficult for American automakers to compete globally. If US manufacturers cannot access key markets like Europe and China, they may be left with limited growth opportunities. This could stunt innovation in the US auto industry and reduce the ability to scale up production, which is essential to remain competitive in the global market. Will Trump's protectionist policies ultimately harm the US auto industry by isolating it from key markets, or will they help American companies regain their competitive edge? The US auto industries struggle to compete globally. The challenges facing the US auto industry are multifaceted, and the EU's decision to open its doors to Chinese electric vehicles only exacerbates the situation. While American car manufacturers have made significant strides in electric vehicle development, they still face considerable barriers in competing with China and Europe on a global scale.
We will discuss how to rebalance our economic relationship. China is the EU's most important trading partner.
The US auto industry, long revered as the leader in automotive innovation, now finds itself at a crossroads as the global landscape shifts toward electrification. One of the major challenges for US automakers is the high cost of production. While companies like Tesla have led the charge in EV technology and innovation, even they face high production costs and supply chain disruptions. These issues, compounded by the trade tariffs imposed by the Trump administration, make it harder for American automakers to remain competitive. The costs of raw materials, such as lithium and cobalt, which are essential for battery production, have skyrocketed. These costs are particularly difficult for US companies to absorb, given that Chinese automakers benefit from lower production costs and government subsidies that allow them to undercut American prices. In addition, the infrastructure necessary to support widespread EV adoption, such as charging stations and renewable energy networks, has been growing more rapidly in countries like China and Europe. As the EU continues to welcome Chinese EVs, this will likely accelerate the development of the necessary infrastructure to support these vehicles. The US, however, has been slow to develop its EV infrastructure, partly due to limited investment and the restrictions imposed by trade barriers. As a result, US automakers are at risk of being left behind, not only in terms of vehicle production, but also in the development of the supporting infrastructure that is critical to the success of the electric vehicle industry. The combination of high production costs, supply chain disruptions, and tariffs leaves the US auto industry at a disadvantage. While the EU moves forward with the integration of Chinese EVs, US automakers are struggling to maintain a competitive edge. This could ultimately harm American workers and businesses, as companies may be forced to scale back production, cut jobs, or even outsource manufacturing to remain competitive. Will the US auto industry be able to overcome these challenges? Or will it remain isolated from key global markets as China and Europe solidify their dominance?
European Union President Ursula von der Leyen told Chinese leader Xi Jinping that the bloc and its biggest trading partner,
China's growing influence in the global EV market. As the European Union continues to roll out the red carpet for Chinese electric vehicles, China's influence in the global EV market is becoming undeniable. The country has spent years building up its EV industry, from production capabilities to technological innovations. With the EU opening its doors to Chinese automakers, China is poised to become an even more dominant force in the EV market, not only in Europe but also around the world. One of China's greatest advantages in the EV market is its ability to scale up production rapidly and cost-effectively. Unlike many Western automakers, Chinese companies have benefited from a highly efficient supply chain, which allows them to produce vehicles at a fraction of the cost of their competitors. This has enabled Chinese companies to offer electric vehicles that are not only affordable, but also of high quality. As a result, Chinese EVs are becoming increasingly competitive in the European market, especially as European automakers struggle with high production costs and regulatory hurdles. Moreover, China has made significant investments in the research and development of cutting-edge technologies in the EV sector. Companies like BYD, NIO, and XPeng are at the forefront of developing advanced battery technologies, autonomous driving features, and vehicle-to-grid capabilities, which allow EVs to interact with the power grid. These innovations give Chinese automakers a competitive edge, particularly as Europe ramps up its push for electrification and aims to meet its ambitious carbon reduction goals. While Chinese EVs are making waves in Europe, their influence is also being felt in other regions. China's ability to produce high-quality, affordable electric vehicles has made them a popular choice in emerging markets, where consumers are eager for more affordable alternatives to traditional gasoline-powered cars. The EU's decision to welcome Chinese EVs into its market is likely to encourage even more global adoption of Chinese-made vehicles, further cementing China's position as a leader in the electric vehicle revolution. With China solidifying its dominance in the global EV market, How will the US and European automakers respond to this growing competition? The geopolitical implications of the EU's decision. The European Union's decision to embrace Chinese electric vehicles is not just an economic one. It's a geopolitical move that could shift the balance of power on the global stage. As the EU deepens its economic ties with China, it may inadvertently weaken its relationship with the United States, which has long been Europe's closest ally. The EU's decision to open its doors to Chinese EVs is a reflection of the growing global influence of China, which has become a formidable player in not just the automotive sector, but also in technology, renewable energy, and other key industries. For the United States, the EU's embrace of Chinese EVs presents a challenge to its long-standing economic and political influence in Europe. As the US focuses on a protectionist approach under President Trump,
hundreds of thousands of American patriots are committed to the honesty of our elections and the integrity.
Imposing tariffs on foreign imports, including those from China, it risks alienating its allies in Europe. The EU's decision to welcome Chinese automakers with open arms signals a growing divergence in economic priorities, as the EU seeks to engage with China to meet its green transition goals, while the US remains focused on protecting domestic industries. This shift in geopolitical priorities could have long-term consequences for global trade relationships. If the EU and China continue to strengthen their economic ties in the EV sector, the US could find itself increasingly isolated in global trade discussions. Europe's growing dependence on Chinese EVs and technology could further erode the US's ability to shape global trade policies, particularly in industries that are critical to the future of transportation and clean energy. At the same time, the EU's move could also affect US-China relations, which have been tense in recent years due to the ongoing trade war. If the US continues to impose tariffs on Chinese goods, China may retaliate by increasing its trade relations with Europe, further isolating the US from key global economic partnerships. This could have profound implications not just for the automotive sector, but for the global economy as a whole. Will the EU's decision to embrace Chinese EVs lead to a reshaping of global trade alliances? Or could it result in heightened tensions between the US, China, and Europe? The economic consequences for American workers. One of the biggest concerns surrounding the EU's decision to open its doors to Chinese electric vehicles is the potential impact on American workers. While President Trump's tariffs were intended to protect jobs in the US auto industry, they may end up having the opposite effect, with American automakers struggling to compete globally due to higher production costs, limited market access, and supply chain disruptions. The tariffs may inadvertently harm American workers rather than protect them. US automakers, already facing challenges in producing electric vehicles at competitive prices, will find it even harder to compete with the influx of affordable Chinese EVs in Europe. As Chinese automakers ramp up production and establish a strong presence in the European market, American companies may be forced to cut jobs or scale back production to remain competitive. This could lead to significant job losses in the US auto industry, particularly in manufacturing-heavy states like Michigan and Ohio. In addition to job losses, the tariffs may also lead to a decline in American manufacturing jobs more broadly. As US automakers struggle to sell their vehicles abroad, they may be forced to reduce their workforce or shift production overseas to remain competitive. This could result in a decline in manufacturing jobs, the very jobs that the tariffs were intended to protect. The ripple effects of this could be felt in other industries, as a decline in auto manufacturing would likely lead to reduced consumer spending and economic downturns in regions reliant on the auto industry. Could Trump's tariffs ultimately backfire, leading to more job losses and a decline in American manufacturing? Or will they succeed in protecting American workers from foreign competition? The technological shift in the global EV market. As the electric vehicle market rapidly evolves, technological innovation has become one of the key battlegrounds. While the US has been a pioneer in the development of electric vehicles, particularly through companies like Tesla,
Tesla was once a tiny Silicon Valley startup with big dreams to revolutionize the motor industry. Today,
the landscape is shifting. China, with its rapid advancements in battery technology,
electric vehicle production has appeared to hit the brakes again after a planned battery plant stop.
Autonomous driving and vehicle-to-grid capabilities is emerging as a formidable player in the EV industry. The European Union's decision to open its doors to Chinese EVs is not just about affordable vehicles. It's also about gaining access to cutting-edge technologies that could drive the future of transportation. China has made substantial investments in research and development to push the boundaries of EV technology. Companies like BYD, NIO, and XPeng are not only producing electric vehicles at an unprecedented scale, but also leading the charge in battery innovation. China's dominance in the global battery supply chain, particularly in the production of lithium-ion batteries, which are crucial for EVs, gives Chinese automakers a significant advantage. This technological edge is something that the US and Europe have struggled to match in terms of production scale and cost efficiency. The EU's decision to welcome Chinese EVs also opens the door to Chinese advances in autonomous driving technologies and energy-efficient systems. As Europe seeks to meet its ambitious environmental goals, the integration of these technologies could accelerate the adoption of EVs, making them more practical for everyday use. With China's expertise in areas like battery production, EV charging networks, and even artificial intelligence, AI for autonomous vehicles, European automakers are gaining access to resources that will allow them to leapfrog the competition. This could be a game changer for Europe, allowing it to accelerate its transition to a greener future. On the other hand, US automakers, despite their early dominance in the EV space, are facing increasing challenges in keeping up with these technological advancements. While Tesla has pioneered much of the innovation in the electric vehicle sector, the company is still facing supply chain issues and regulatory hurdles that have hindered its growth. With Chinese companies leading the charge in battery production, infrastructure development, and AI-driven innovation, US automakers are at risk of falling behind. As China's technological edge in the EV market grows, will the US and Europe be able to keep up? Or will they be left scrambling to catch up with the advancements coming from China? The EU's pragmatic approach versus America's protectionism. The global shift toward electric vehicles is not only an economic and technological shift, it's also a reflection of differing approaches to trade and economic policy. While the European Union embraces Chinese EVs as a way to accelerate its transition to electric mobility and reduce emissions, the United States has chosen a more protectionist stance. President Trump's tariffs on foreign automakers were meant to protect American jobs and businesses, but they have inadvertently created a divide between the US and the rest of the world. The EU's decision to welcome Chinese EVs is a pragmatic one. Europe is facing aggressive climate targets, and it needs to accelerate its transition to electric vehicles in order to meet those goals. By embracing Chinese EVs, which offer affordable prices and advanced technology, the EU is making a calculated move to reduce its carbon footprint while also providing consumers with more choices. The move also allows European automakers to collaborate with Chinese companies on cutting-edge technologies, from battery production to autonomous driving systems, which could help Europe remain competitive in the global EV market. In contrast, the United States has opted for a more protectionist approach. By imposing tariffs on Chinese EVs and other foreign imports, the Trump administration has attempted to shield American manufacturers from competition. However, this approach risks isolating the US from key global markets and technological advancements. While the tariffs may offer short-term relief for US automakers, they are unlikely to address the broader challenges facing the industry. The US is missing out on opportunities for collaboration and innovation, which are essential for long-term success in the rapidly changing automotive landscape. This economic divide could have long-lasting consequences for global trade dynamics. As China's influence in the EV market continues to grow, the US risks falling further behind in the race for the future of transportation. By choosing to prioritize domestic production at the cost of global collaboration, the US may be positioning itself for a more insular and less competitive future, while Europe's embrace of Chinese EVs positions it as a leader in the green mobility revolution. Will the US continue its protectionist approach, or will it find a way to engage more collaboratively in the global EV race? Let's explore the potential economic ramifications of this divide. The impact on global supply chains and raw materials. One of the most significant consequences of the EU's decision to open its doors to Chinese electric vehicles is the impact on global supply chains. The production of electric vehicles relies heavily on raw materials like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, materials that are essential for battery production. China has long dominated the supply chain for these critical materials, which gives Chinese automakers a significant advantage in the EV market. The EU's decision to embrace Chinese EVs essentially strengthens China's position in the global supply chain, making it even more difficult for the US to secure these vital resources. China's dominance in the EV supply chain is not just about the raw materials themselves, it's also about the ability to control pricing and access to these materials. As more and more European automakers shift toward Chinese-made EVs, the demand for these materials will only increase. This will likely make it more difficult for US automakers to compete, as they will be at the mercy of China's pricing and production capabilities. In addition, as China continues to expand its EV market in Europe, it will only further cement its control over the global supply chain. For the US, this presents a significant challenge. While the country has made efforts to secure domestic sources of lithium and other critical materials, it remains heavily dependent on foreign sources, particularly China. The EU's decision to open its doors to Chinese EVs further exacerbates this issue, as it strengthens China's position in the global supply chain and makes it even harder for US automakers to gain access to the materials they need to produce competitive EVs. The growing dependence on China for critical materials also raises geopolitical concerns. If China continues to dominate the global supply chain for EVs and related technologies, it could use its control over these materials to exert leverage in trade negotiations and geopolitical discussions. This could have significant implications for the US and its allies, particularly if tensions between China and the US continue to escalate. With China strengthening its hold on the global supply chain for EVs, what does this mean for the US auto industry and its ability to compete in the future? The future of the US auto industry. As the electric vehicle market continues to evolve, the US auto industry is facing a pivotal moment. The decision by the European Union to open its doors to Chinese EVs has created a significant shift in the global automotive landscape. The question now is, can the US auto industry adapt to this new reality, or will it be left behind? In order to remain competitive, the US must address several critical challenges. One of the most pressing is the high cost of EV production. While Chinese automakers have been able to keep production costs low thanks to subsidies and a highly efficient supply chain, US automakers have struggled with high production costs, supply chain disruptions, and regulatory uncertainty. In addition, tariffs imposed by the Trump administration have made it more difficult for US automakers to access affordable foreign materials, further raising production costs. The US also faces significant challenges in terms of infrastructure. While China has made significant strides in building out its EV charging network, the US has lagged behind in this area. This lack of infrastructure makes it more difficult for US consumers to adopt electric vehicles, especially in rural areas where charging stations are scarce. In contrast, the EU is rapidly expanding its EV infrastructure, making it easier for consumers to adopt electric vehicles and creating a more attractive market for automakers. To remain competitive, the US auto industry must invest in new technologies, lower production costs, and expand its charging infrastructure. However, this will require significant investment and collaboration between automakers, tech companies, and government agencies. If the US continues to prioritize protectionism over collaboration, it risks falling behind, not just in the automotive industry, but in the broader transition to clean energy. Can the US auto industry rise to the challenge and adapt to the rapidly changing global market, or will it struggle to compete as China and Europe lead the way in the EV revolution? The geopolitical implications of the EU-China EV partnership. As the global race for electric vehicle dominance intensifies, the geopolitical consequences of the EU's decision to embrace Chinese EVs cannot be understated. The EU's move to open its market to Chinese-made electric vehicles is not just an economic shift, it's a strategic realignment that has the potential to reshape global alliances and the balance of power in international trade. The United States, for decades, has been a dominant force in global trade and industry. Historically, it has maintained close economic and geopolitical ties with Europe, particularly in the automotive sector. However, the EU's decision to welcome Chinese EVs could signal the beginning of a shift in global economic priorities. This change is partly driven by Europe's desire to quickly and cost-effectively transition to electric mobility in order to meet its ambitious climate goals. By turning to China, Europe is securing not just affordable vehicles, but also gaining access to China's advanced manufacturing and battery technology, which will be crucial in the coming decades. This deepening partnership between Europe and China could have far-reaching geopolitical consequences, especially in the context of the ongoing US-China trade war. By embracing Chinese electric vehicles, the EU is inadvertently positioning itself closer to China, a country that has rapidly become a global economic powerhouse. While the US continues to impose tariffs and pursue protectionist policies, the EU is choosing to engage with China, which could result in a growing economic dependency between Europe and China. This shift could potentially weaken the US's influence on global trade and international policy. China's growing dominance in the EV market could also extend beyond just the automotive sector. As Chinese companies like BYD and NIO continue to expand their presence in Europe, they will inevitably bring with them advanced technologies in battery production, autonomous driving, and AI integration. These technologies, already at the forefront of the EV revolution, could give China an even greater edge in shaping the future of global energy and transportation systems. The stakes in the global electric vehicle race have never been higher. With the EU's decision to open its doors to Chinese EVs, the future of the US auto industry hangs in the balance. Will the US be able to adapt to this new reality, or will it be left behind as China and Europe dominate the EV market? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.